Welcome back to Financial Fortitude. I'm Michael Acosta, joined by my co-host, Brady Hemmerly.
And today we're bringing back one of our most impactful episodes, especially for those of you stepping into a major financial transition.
Whether you're a medical student who just matched, which is super exciting, and you're about to start residency, or you're finishing up residency and/or fellowship and about to step into your first attending paycheck, this is one of the most important financial decision windows of your life.
You're going from a limited income to real income, or about to. And the decisions you make here can either accelerate your financial life or quietly set you back years.
Now, before we jump in, we do need to address a major update since this episode originally aired back in August of 2025.
The saving on a valuable education plan, is no longer a viable repayment option, following recent legislation changes tied to what's being referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill.
That's correct. That means many borrowers who were enrolled in the Saving on a Valuable Education SAVE income-driven repayment plan are now being required to transition into a different income-driven repayment plan, which is creating a huge headache and some anxiety for borrowers. And that shift is actually having real impact on monthly payments for borrowers, interest accumulation, and long-term forgiveness strategies for programs like public service loan forgiveness.
So as you listen to this episode, just keep in mind the framework we discussed still absolutely applies, how to think about your cash flow, avoiding lifestyle creep, and making intentional decisions early.
But when it comes to your student loan strategy specifically, this is not a set it and forget it environment anymore. The rules are changing, and your plan needs to evolve with them as well.
And if you're unsure what plan you should be in or how this impacts your long-term strategy, that's exactly where getting guidance can make a big difference.
All right, let's jump back into this episode. You're making money now. What? Smart money moves for residents.
Today's episode is for all the residents and fellows out there who just started seeing commas in their paychecks.
If you're thinking, I'm making money now, so what's next? This one's for you. We'll unpack what to do before lifestyle creeps in, how to manage your student loans without losing your mind, and how to start building real wealth without waiting for your attending salary.
We're talking cash flow, saving strategy, debt prioritization, and yes, how to protect your most important asset.
Let's jump in. This is the episode we wish someone handed us right out of med school.
Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in.
Brady, this is a timely conversation and topic and something that I actually give seminars on pretty frequently throughout the course of the year across multiple residency programs and medical schools. And it's packed with so much information, so much so that it's almost overwhelming at times and can be broken up into maybe 2 or 3 different workshops. But it's timely because right now we're in the middle of summer, so it's July, and a lot of medical students and or residents or fellows have gone through a couple transitions. So they've gone from either graduating from medical school and heading off to their first year of residency based off their area of focus. And so they're going to be considered what's known as a PGY1. And they probably started in late June, early July, depending on geographical location, as well as just the residency program itself. On the other hand, you have residents and fellows who are completing their training and are going from being in training to now attending, which is a completely different animal in itself. So this concept of you're making money, now what, I think is applicable on both sides of the spectrum, right? Going from medical school into training, but also the bigger leap, which is from training into attending. And that's where you're going to see more of the commas hit the income when you get that paycheck.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk through all of the different considerations during these transitions because I'd almost call you a resident expert here, as I think this is a lot of the guidance that you provide residents, newly attendings, pretty much day in and day out in your practice. And so I'd like to, for our listeners who perhaps aren't in the medical field or just listeners who are new to our podcast, explain what that transition looks like from a financial perspective, first from medical school to residency, and then residency to attending. Like, what does someone's world look like in each one of those periods, at least?
Yeah, so it's not evergreen. It's not the same for everyone, depending on where they're at in their personal journey or even their professional journey. So I would break it down into 3 categories. You have the single individual who went to a 4-year undergraduate maybe took time off, maybe didn't, and decided to enroll in medical school, and so has to complete that, right? And they're basically a full-time student again, going through rigorous curriculum. When they transition from medical school into residency, well, now they're still technically quote unquote students. They're still in training, on the job learning, but they're employed by a hospital system where they're getting mentored and training and that hands-on guidance on how to care for their patients, right? So this is going from textbook application to real life application. And so financially, that leap from medical school into residency isn't all that significant, right? I'm not minimalizing it, but depending on geographical location and in the actual program that you're enrolled in, your first year of residency, you might be making $50,000 to $55,000 a year as a single individual. Now, the second situation or category would be someone who, again, goes to undergraduate, goes to medical school, but maybe they're married after undergraduate or while in medical school, right? Maybe they're starting a family, whether it be in residency or fellowship before transitioning into attending. So if that's the case, then it's a conversation or trying to get an understanding of, okay, well, is their spouse also a medical student or resident, or are they a non-medical professional? And then it's, okay, well, do they have student loans or don't they? And that's kind of the third category of, okay, well, they're not single, they're married, they have children, but either both of them are going to be in medical professionals or one's not. One makes a significantly higher income while the other spouse is in training. Both have student loans, both don't. So again, it's a wide range, but it can look very different across the board.
So financially, in this case, if I'm in medical school, I'm making zero income or perhaps minimal income because most of my time is occupied by studying and the rigorous curriculum that I'm in. Once I transition into residency, I'm making what I would call like a starter like salary, 55, 65, 75,000, depending on what year of residency that I'm in. But the moment that me and perhaps my spouse transition into full-time attending, at that point, I'm making what, would you say? Or what do you see?
So I'd say it's a pretty wide range depending on overall specialty and if the individual is going to be working in the public service sector or if they're going to be working in the private sector, right? So if you take family medicine, which is a 3-year residency training program. So again, 4 years of undergraduate, I believe 4 years of medical school, and then getting into a 3-year training. They're going to come out making, depending on geographical location, anywhere from about 189,000 to about 250, maybe 275,000, right? And what I mean by geographical location is that you have to take into account cost of living. So if you live in a city like the Bay Area, your base salary might start out a little bit higher for family medicine. However, your cost of living is going to be significantly higher compared to Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, if you're someone who is going to go into general surgery, you're probably going to be in residency for about 5 years.
Okay.
And then if you want to become a specialist in a certain type of surgery, then you're going to do a fellowship, which is what I would consider like a master's program specific to that sub-medical focus.
Okay.
And those individuals in the private sector could make as much as $800,000 over the course of like a 1 to 2 year period post completion of training and getting into their attending role.
So what jumps out to me there is medical school, again, lower income. There's probably not that much complexity in someone's financial world unless, like you mentioned before, I have a spouse who's working another career or is making income outside of the medical profession. There's a slight jump when you move into residency. I'm making some more income now, at least enough to survive on and feel a little bit comfortable on. But that transition from residency to attending is huge financially, right? Hey, my salary has 4x, 5x, 10x, depending on the specialty that I have and the position that I move into after residency and potential fellowship. And so that's where I think a lot of our conversation is going to focus on today is, hey, now that we're making as newly attending medical professionals real money, large sums of money, what changes, what's different, what are some things to consider to jumpstart your financial journey in perhaps the best direction?
I'd say let's start with the transition from medical school into residency, right? And keeping it very basic. And the triage process and the treatment plan that we apply and guide clients through is very applicable on both sides of the spectrum, right? Again, transitioning from medical school into residency or training, and then going from training into attending. Where it differs is when you get into the fine details of the multiples at which can be utilized from your income, right? How much is being saved? How much is being used to pay debt? How much is being used to safeguard your financial well-being and create some fortitude on your financial plan? And so it's a matter of saying, okay, well, what benefits are being offered? What should I opt into? What should I opt out of or just set aside? And it's a matter of surviving and advancing, trying to squirrel away as much as you can. You don't have to be maxing out your retirement plan. Most individuals aren't going to be able to, because again, they're making $50,000 to $60,000 in their first year, plus or minus. And so it's, okay, well, should I even contribute up to the match? A lot of the times these hospital systems are going to offer some sort of match of either 3 to 5%. So what I mean by that is if you put 3% and their match is 3%, well, you're getting some free money. However, you're kind of locked out of that money like we've talked about in past episodes, at least until you reach age 59 and a half, so that you're not hit with a early withdrawal distribution penalty. Now, the other thing that has to be considered is, okay, well, again, your greatest asset's your ability to earn income. Your biggest risk is this period of time while you're in training. If you're in your third year and your income has gradually increased by 3 to 5% cost of living, and let's just say you're now making $62,000 a year and you're projected to be making $250,000 or $300,000 a year at the end of your third year of training, well, if something happens to you, whether you're out with your friends on a holiday weekend, which again, you have very little time leisurely while you're in medical school and training, but if you're out on the lake celebrating something like most of us did this past 4th of July, and you get injured, well, now you can't practice medicine in the same capacity as you could prior to that accident. Well, most residency programs are going to have a very basic group long-term disability policy. So it's going to be minimal protection based off of your residency, your training income. Well, a lot of the times, these residents and fellows actually have access to some pretty attractive long-term disability solutions where they can get underwritten as if they're already in an attending position. So not that they are quote unquote overprotected, but they are bridging the gap between that highest risk period of making the lowest level of income they're ever going to make to when it multiplies, like you mentioned earlier, by 5x, 6x, and in some instances 10x based off their overall specialty. So just understanding that, hey, things do happen. You can become a statistic. Most of us think that we won't. But, making sure that you're safeguarding your ability to earn that income so that if something does happen, you don't miss out, right? You don't lose out on all that wealth that could be generated. And then just, again, trying to manage your cash flow as much as possible. I tell all the residents that, hey, you probably don't have a ton of leisure time, but when you do, just make sure you're being prudent in how you're spending money so that you can start to build disciplined habits of putting away the right amount of money, and we're working you towards becoming an extraordinary wealth builder.
So, Michael, the question that I have for you then is, knowing that every patient looks different, the framework is going to look similar. So when you're speaking to a resident moving into an attending position or perhaps a fellowship program on their way there, what is the first stop or first workshop in that planning framework that we address or begin to triage with clients? What's important? What's to consider? What are things to think through?
Yeah, I say the first stop on the journey is understanding the cash flow scenario that you're in. So again, I keep harping on geographical location being a primary factor, but you might have been in the Southeast where it's a little bit less costly from a cost of living perspective, and then you're going to be transitioning from training into your attending role in the Bay Area, right? So again, you might get a higher base salary guaranteed for the first year or two, but cost of living is going to be a lot higher. And then it's a matter of, well, are you going to have roommates? Or if you're married, are you and your spouse going to be purchasing a home? And then also factoring in the student loan commitments, because most of these individuals will have student loans in some capacity. So I think starting with the cash flow aspect is the most important. And so conducting a cash flow analysis of tracking what's going in and what's going out, and then trying to right out of the gates, because your income is multiplied by so much, trying to commit to putting, that extraordinary wealth builder percentage of income, gross income, on your balance sheet as opposed to the balance sheet of someone else, and just creating that disciplined, repeatable habit of 15 to 20% of your gross income. And so if you make $250,000, the goal should be $50,000. Now, depending on your student loan framework, which again, this is going to be a component of that treatment plan here in a second, it's understanding, well, how much of that $50,000 should be earmarked for a long-term bucket commitment, like a pre-tax 403B or 401k, or even a Roth 401k, depending on if you have student loans or not.
So let's pause there, because I think any resident transitioning into an attending position has a significant advantage, or at least a notable difference compared to your financial professional or compared to your sales professional. When you move from residency into attending, your income has increased significantly, pretty much with the snap of a finger. But what we find oftentimes is, well, most of our residents before moving or making that transition are used to living off of a lower income. They've been doing it for the past 3 to 5 years, depending on the length of their term. So what advantage does that provide those clients when jumping straight to a much higher salary?
I would say it offers not only an advantage, but also a disadvantage, something that's a little bit dangerous in my mind. And I'll explain here in a second. But the advantage is that you're used to living off less, no different than an individual who's an undergraduate living off of the money that they saved up over the summertime and then getting into their first entry-level position. It's not the same scale of multiple, but it's something that can be relatable. So we're used to living off of the bare minimum, being very frugal, living off ramen, not going out very frequently, rightfully so, because they have crazy hours, right? Sometimes they're working nights, sometimes they're working during the day. It's all over the place. Now, the benefit of that is you already have what I would consider this minimalist mindset, this frugal mindset. So if you can sustain that into the first 1 to 3 years of attending and really push back on that lifestyle creep, then I would say you're going to improve the probability of success of being able to build wealth in an accelerated manner.
Sure. You
right?
can,
to quote unquote, make up for time where you were saving a lot less as a multiple of income while you were in training.
sure, you can upgrade your lifestyle at least comfortably enough to move into your attending position, but you don't necessarily have to go out and spend every single dollar that you're now making because, hey, 6 months ago, you weren't making any of these dollars to begin with.
Correct. And I'd say on the other side, where it gets dangerous is that individuals have been frugal for so long that when they get a taste of that sweetener, that sugar, just think about somebody who's on a diet and who is limiting carbs, sugar, whatever it might be for whatever reason. The moment you get a taste of it again, you have a risk of going on a bender, right? Of almost overindulging. So you go from making $65,000, $70,000 a year, and now you're making $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year. And albeit that sounds like a large sum, when you start to factor in federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, Medicare, some states have multiple state taxes for their own disability programs. There are a lot of eroding factors that can eat away at your net paycheck that you actually get to take home. And so you might feel a little spread thin, surprisingly, even making that level of income, especially if you're allowing your lifestyle to creep up and you're keeping up with the Kardashians.
And I think that's really important to note because what we oftentimes find is residents who move into attending go from making a smaller income to such larger income. But the feedback that we're getting as financial professionals very often is, hey, I'm still living paycheck to paycheck. And I don't know why, right? It's like, hey, I'm now making better money than I ever have in the past, but it feels just as tight as it did in residency. What gives?
Yeah, and some of that is just how medical professionals can be, and this is my opinion, and so, I'll use these words very loosely, but how they can be preyed upon, because individuals know that they're going to make a large sum of money, and so it's like, okay, well, if you're going to go get a home, you can get underwritten with a physician-based loan that's going to give you 100% financing, in many instances up to $850,000 with no money down, no PMI. Now, do you need an $850,000 mortgage coming out of residency or training? Probably not. Or going and buying a brand new SUV, which might cost you anywhere from $70,000 to $100,000 depending on the make and model and year. And understanding what that car payment is going to be like, more than likely with where interest rates are today in July of 2025, probably $1,000 to $1,200 depending on if any money's put down, which in most instances, these residents don't have a ton of money set aside from an emergency fund perspective, which we're going to get into where that falls into this treatment plan. So step one, cash flow analysis and engaging, can I become an extraordinary wealth builder right out of the gates? Can I commit to this? And if it were a perfect scenario, barring anything specific to student loan planning, I'd say just contribute to the retirement plan up to the match and then reassess if there are student loans so that you can start to build capital liquidity on your balance sheet in that short-term and mid-term bucket with 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in your emergency fund, depending on if you're single or married or single income versus dual income. And then anything above and beyond that into that midterm bucket where you're starting to take on a little bit more market exposure, a little bit more growth orientation so that you could try to outpace the high yields that are being offered and savings accounts today, right? Which is going to range anywhere from about 3.25% to about 4.25%, depending on the institution. Now, step 2 in this is de-risking the situation. And we've talked about this in past episodes. We've had episodes specific to protecting your biggest and greatest asset. We've had episodes talking about not waiting until the very last minute to secure your life with life insurance, because it could be a pretty detrimental financial outcome if you wait too long and something bad happens. But you need to de-risk your balance sheet, and it's different for everybody. And we talked about this in that there are different medical procedures specific to the overall need of the patient. Meaning that if I'm going to go have a surgery that's specific to my heart, depending on the type of surgery, it could be very different depending on the procedure in itself, whether it's something to do with an artery, whether it's something to do with a valve, whatever it might be. So when it comes to de-risking, it's understanding what does your unique circumstances look like? Are you single or are you married? Do you have dependents? Do you want to have dependents? Do you own a home? Have you taken advantage of your group benefits? Are you putting safeguards in place from a legal perspective with legal documents? Have you safeguarded your assets and your balance sheet from a liability perspective with an umbrella policy? These are the things that need to be considered and discussed and just become educated on. And then you can ultimately make the decision of, do I ignore, do I budget, or do I transfer the risk to somebody else?
Michael, so step 2 in the financial planning framework, right? This idea of de-risking. What about it looks different for a medical professional compared to perhaps a financial professional or a sales professional or someone out there who's not working in a more specialty-based field?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is going to be, one, the multiple of income that they're going to be making at such a relatively younger age. I know that there are some individuals who have a change of career or has a very long stint in training, and so can be, at a point to where they're in their mid to late 40s, early 50s when they get into their attending role. But on the surface level, it's going to be relatively early on in their career, making a significant amount of income. But then from a group benefit perspective, there are caps on certain benefits, and then it becomes inefficient to go beyond that cap. So what do I mean by that? Well, from a group term insurance standpoint, you might get 1x, 2x, 2.5x your base salary in group term life insurance. Anything above and beyond that, you're going to have to pay for from a supplemental perspective. And if your employer's giving you a larger benefit above and beyond the IRS limits, then the portion that they're paying for above and beyond the limits can be taxable to you as well from a benefit perspective. From a disability standpoint, they're also going to have caps, right? If you go work in a private practice, they may not have a strong group long-term disability policy. So what do I mean by a cap? You might go work for a hospital system that offers you 66.5% replacement of your gross income base salary, and it's capped at $12,000 in monthly benefit. Okay, it could be 100% paid for by the hospital system, by your employer, which means if you ever go on claim, that benefit is 100% taxable, like we've spoken about in episodes past. So the problem there is that you end up being underprotected from an income replacement standpoint unknowingly, right? Because you're not a specialist in this realm.
Sure.
Right? You're a specialist in surgery, in family medicine, in pediatrics, whatever it might be. And so it just gets overlooked.
Sure,
right?
You're making $300,000 a year, but your protections are really only protecting $144,000 still taxable to you. At this point, less than half of your income, right? Unknowingly, less than half of your income is protected.
Yeah, a lot of the times when we start to dissect this for the clients, present them the facts of where they're at, it's, hey, you have 66.5% of your gross income replaced through group coverage that's paid for by your employer. However, after taxes based on tax rates and everything else like that and the cap, you really only have like 35 to 42% of your income replaced, which is a huge downgrade. And it's like, okay, well, what can we do to keep that from happening? If it does happen, well, let's put a stopgap in place. And my opinion is that the stronger your defense, the more aggressive you can be on offense. You can get more creative, right? Just think about the Kansas City Chiefs. Because they have such a strong defense, whenever they're just manhandling their opponents, and I'm not a huge fan of the Kansas City Chiefs, so hopefully I didn't offend anybody with that statement, but they get very creative with their play calling. They have more fun. They're more loose with their offense because they know that if they turn the ball over or if they turn it over on downs, that their defense is going to bow their neck and be able to support them and keep the game tighter if it's a close game or just continue to let them run away. So same concept from a financial planning standpoint. The stronger your fortitude, the deeper and wider the moat around your financial fortress, the more aggressive you can be on offense. And it takes pressure off of you knowing that, hey, I am prepared in the event life decides to throw a curveball at me for whatever comes my way, because I've either budgeted for this type of life event or I've transferred the risk to somebody else in exchange for some sort of minimal premium.
Sure. If we're following the framework, we've already started budgeting or putting money aside in an extraordinary fashion. And if we followed the framework through step 2, hey, we've adequately prepared for the unknown, knowing that something that we're not expecting is going to happen in the future. I think the big call outs here, at least that I'm hearing, is one, pure magnitude of earning potential, right, is much different or much larger for any medical professional compared to your more generic coming out of college professional. So right away, that's worth considering. Hey, there's more to protect on the table. I think another thing worth considering that we haven't talked through is, I would say, just the pure specialty that medical professionals have, right? Hey, I am a college-educated, white-collar professional. You and I happen to work in the financial planning space, but if we were to get injured, perhaps, or if we were to get sick in some capacity, there are more options for us to transition into a more similar like career field. Not everyone can do heart surgery coming out of college. So the idea that, hey, I have an extreme specialty in a field that only few professionals can really excel in, and I have more risks on the table of, hey, if I can't use my hands appropriately, even if I'm completely healthy, that's a challenge for me, right? Because if I can't use my hands, I can't do surgery.
Right. And then it's okay, well, what are your next best options? Well, maybe it's being a hospitalist. Maybe it's going and working in an administration. Maybe it's being a medical witness, right? But you're more than likely not going to make the same level of income that you were if you were healthy and able to use your hands and continue to conduct surgeries. So again, step 1, cash flow analysis, trying to target extraordinary wealth building status. Step 2, de-risking the situation, putting a stellar, strong defense in place. And then phase 3 is more of, hey, let's get liquid. Let's build some capital on our balance sheet that can be leveraged, that we can utilize, that can provide additional safety net for us in the event of untimely events or positive investment opportunities, right? The more capital we have on our side of the balance sheet as opposed to the balance sheets of others, the more optionality and flexibility we have with our financial decision-making process.
So explain that
Right.
to me, getting liquid. Does that just simply mean saving as much as possible into my retirement plan now that I have the income, or is there something more specific that you're encouraging newly attending physicians to consider? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I'd say there's multiple tiers to liquidity, in my opinion. And we coach our clients with this. So tier 1 is going to be just quick cash, savings, emergency fund, cash value in a life insurance policy, money markets, just anything that I can tap into really quickly without unnecessary taxes and penalties. So think about your savings in your checking or money market. If it's savings and checking, you can go to an ATM and pull the cash out almost instantaneously. You can stroke a check. You can swipe your debit card. If it's money market, it's still relatively quick, but it might take 24 to 48 business hours to get into your checking account for you to access. Tier 2 is going to be what they call a non-qualified investment account or a brokerage account, or just really a non-retirement investment account, right? After-tax dollars that's going in, different tax advantages and disadvantages, but still liquid in the sense that you can sell those investments either at a gain or at a loss. And within 48 to 72 business hours, that money can be in your checking account for you to utilize. You just have to be able to liquidate or sell the investments that you are holding. What's beneficial there is that there's not an early withdrawal penalty of 10%, like you would have with your IRAs, your Roth IRA, your 401k, your 403bs. Those, in my opinion, would be tier 3, primarily because they can be disadvantageous from a tax perspective. If you're going to take an early distribution before age 59 and a half, again, 10% early withdrawal penalty, plus you're going to be hit with ordinary income taxes if it's pre-tax, right? Now, there are other ways to tap into it by way of, any sort of IRS exceptions to the 10% early withdrawal penalty. You might be able to take a loan against it. But the idea is that you have access to capital that you can utilize, whether it's for a down payment on a home, whether it's for down payment on upgrading your vehicle because you saved prudently in the car that you were driving around since your senior year in undergraduate is starting to not put out like it used to. It's no longer reliable, right? And so you've lost confidence in it. Or maybe there's a large trip that you want to go on. Or maybe it's a large payment towards some sort of debt that's on your balance sheet because we've built up this reserve and now it's a conversation of, okay, do we continue to make the monthly payment or do we just pay it off in one lump sum? So again, optionality with access to the liquidity and the capital.
Sure. I think the important component to pull out of what you just mentioned there was understanding from a treatment plan perspective, right? Aligning goals. Hey, what do I want to accomplish as an individual or as a family? What's most important to me? And understanding where my liquidity is going and what my access looks like before just making an arbitrary decision. It's very easy to say, hey, I've got this 401k plan now. I'm making a great income. I can max this thing out. Well, in many instances, that account is more restrictive to goals pre-age 59 and a half. And many of the medical professionals, newly attending physicians that we see and work with, they have other goals before jumping straight to retirement. Right? It's, hey, I'm looking to now start a family. I want to buy that next house. I am ready to upgrade some vehicles. I've got some debts to take care of. I've got some experience now to go out and live because I'm not studying 24/7 anymore. I'm not working 24/7 anymore. So step one, getting organized, discipline, really the best handle on your cash flow. Step two, understanding that your world has risks that perhaps are different from any other professional. And then step three is being really intentional and goal focused on where money's going, how it's working for you, and what the 3, 5, 10-year future looks like before just making any arbitrary decision.
Yeah, because surprisingly enough, medical professionals, a lot of the ones that we interact with, they spend a lot of time spending money on training in their intellectual properties and their unique abilities. Just think about it. 4 years of undergraduate, medical school, plus training. And some of these residency and fellowships with research and everything else like that could last a total of 9 years just from a training perspective, not education, training. So all that being said, a lot of them often will say, hey, I don't feel like working in medicine until I'm 60, 65, 67, because they understand the burnout effect of this.
Sure.
Right? Like there is a significant burnout effect for medical professionals that I think is overlooked with the glamour of, hey, you're going to make a boatload of money from a subjective perspective. And the burnout's real. So if you want to be able to safeguard yourself from burnout, make sure you have access to capital so that you can buy yourself time, so that you can potentially invest in other income stream opportunities, so that you can potentially start your own business. If you practice a type of medicine that allows you to own your own practice versus having to be tied to a hospital system, right? Not all specialties will allow that. Like there's some circumstances, but again, optionality, flexibility, take control of your financial decision-making process, being subject to somebody else forcing you to make decisions because of your limited options. And then lastly, the fourth step in the triage process is just getting to a point where you're living a debt-free life, right? With the understanding that not all debts are the same. Just like not all financial landscapes are the same at a starting point or throughout the journey, there's a lot of unique ability to it. And I'm a firm believer that managing student loan debt as a primary focus is not the same way that you manage a mortgage or a credit card or an auto loan. This is something that is still relatively in its infancy for our society, maybe the last 20, 30 years worth of, having to deal with student loan debt, but it's become significantly more of a burden on professionals, white collar professionals, specifically medical professionals, because of the rate at which the cost of tuition has increased over the course of the last 2 to 3 decades. So it's saying, hey, based on my SMART goals that we've defined before going through this entire triage process, right? Steps 1, 2, 3, now at 4. What types of debts do I have? What did I accrue while I was in medical school and or residency or training? And how do I prioritize eliminating them with my army of dollar bills?
So let's talk
Right.
through that a little bit further, because I'm curious as to what you have seen, because you, with your certified student loan professional designation, work day in and day out with medical professionals, really complex student loan planning. So there, I'm sure, are the medical professionals that you run into that come out of schooling with zero debts, but I'd say more few and far between. But give us the landscape as to what you typically see on someone's plate in regards to student loan type debt loads out there.
So if we're looking at specific to medical students and let's say general dentists, we're going to see on average about $200,000 in just medical school debt. Okay, so just the 4 years of medical school, which is typically comprised of the cost of the tuition for the education, plus the cost of lifestyle demand for the student. And so that's going to be broken up between 2 different loan types, and we're not going to get into the weeds with that. If you're a dentist, it's probably closer to about $300,000 to $400,000 in graduate school debt. And then, of course, undergraduate, which could be anywhere from another $25,000 to $55,000 on top of that. So pretty significant amount. Now, the other thing is that when these medical students are having to travel across the country to interview with residency programs in preparation for match day, well, they could be incurring personal debt. They could be taking out personal loans to be able to pay for, their rotations at different hospital systems while they're doing interviews, staying in hotels, paying for their cost of living, whether it's with credit cards, whether it's with personal loans. I think of my brother-in-law who, had multiple children and the entire family was going, or maybe it was just him, depending on the geographical location of the rotation. And so you can rack up some private loans through credit cards, personal loans, or even like a private student loan just to cover that, as well as the federal student loans for the cost of the education. And then if you did not manage your personal finances well in medical school and in residency, you might have credit card debt.
So Michael, with all that in mind, hey, I'm a medical student transitioning to residency, then transitioning to attending. I've got a small stack of undergraduate loans. I've got a much larger stack of now graduate medical school loans. And perhaps I've got a little bit of personal debt on the side to manage what my lifestyle and all of that transition has looked like. What would you say is typical debt planning for that newly attending physician? I know with many of the physicians that we speak to, hey, that tends to be step one before extraordinary wealth building, de-risking, or getting liquid. Debt tends to be the first focus. But how are most people attacking or at least analyzing what potential plan looks like?
Yeah, I will say when we have those initial consultations with the residents and fellows and attendings, it's like, hey, I need to eliminate this debt as quickly as possible because one, that's what all of my directors were telling me to do, or that's what some of my colleagues are doing.
Or even parents, right? It's
or
like,
even parents,
hey, I haven't
right?
had a student loan in the past as a parent, so you ought to get rid of yours as fast as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's the talking heads in the media that say that debt's bad, right? But I'm a firm believer that there are certain debts that are valuable, and I would say that low interest bearing debts as well as federal student loan debts are valuable, and let's exhaust the efficiency of leveraging the federal student loan debt for as long as possible until there's no more juice to be squeezed out of it. And so usually what we'll do is it almost coincides with step one, which is that cash flow analysis, because we need to be able to understand how much discretionary cash flow do we have left over to hit our extraordinary wealth building rate, putting money on our balance sheets first as opposed to the balance sheets of others. And then also, what is the trajectory of my career? Am I going to be working in the public service sector? Am I going the private practice route? And so if I'm in the public service sector, then I know public service loan forgiveness is an option. And so that means I need to make payments towards my student loans in an income-driven repayment plan while working for a qualifying employer for at least 120 months. The great thing, as of today, July 2025, is that residency and fellowship still counts towards qualifying payments for public service loan forgiveness. Now, one thing that you have to be mindful of is that when you complete your medical school and go into residency, your loans are going to be in a grace period forbearance. So about 6 months, you will not be allowed to enroll in a repayment plan. Well, you're going to start your residency program about 1 to 2 months after you graduate from medical school. So there are tips and tricks to be able to get your loans out of that status so that you can opt into an income-driven repayment plan and start getting about 3 to 6 months worth of qualifying payments the moment you hit the ground running with training. Now, it's not the end of the world if you don't get them, but again, reach out to us and we can provide you with those appropriate steps on how to get your loans out of that grace period so that you can start accruing qualifying payments. But it's a great way to get at a minimal 36 months towards the 120 qualifying months that you need for public service loan forgiveness to kick in. And then as of today, based on the current IRS rules, that forgiveness for public service loan forgiveness is tax exempt in federally and in most states from a tax perspective. So that's huge for them. Now, if you go on the private practice route, then it's a conversation of, well, how do I take 1 to 3 years to build out the foundation of my balance sheet, to build that emergency fund, to build some liquidity, to build some disciplined savings habits, maybe to tackle some of these low-hanging fruit goals like buying my first property, getting married, having a honeymoon, starting a family, and again, building the reserves so that you have flexibility and optionality and some financial confidence. And then we go back and start aggressively attacking the private loans or tackling the federal student loans in a more strategic manner where we're focusing on the highest interest-bearing loan tranches with the highest outstanding balance. And since we know that that's where most of the interest is going to accrue with our overpayments, right? Maybe if you're being compensated based on your production, or if you've had the opportunity to buy in as a partner in a practice and you're getting quarterly distributions or annual distributions as an owner, utilizing a percentage of that to accelerate the payoff of the debt. So we will string it along at the surface level as if we're going to make payments for 15, 20, 25 years. But in reality, we're going to use the what I would consider the quote unquote windfall compensation to be able to accelerate that debt payoff in the most strategic manner.
So talk to me there. It sounds like what you've illustrated and what you're helping clients with on a regular basis is understanding and becoming really good at steps 1, 2, and 3, leaving debt planning on the back end of the triage plan, and then attacking things more strategically rather than, hey, every dollar just goes to this debt. What advantage does that award a medical professional, newly attending physician, compared to an individual who might just spend or expend all of their resources to just simply pay debts down as fast as possible?
I would say it gives them the opportunity for clarity, confidence, but also balance in their life. Balance in the sense that you've been grinding and training and being a minimalist for many years up to this point, from undergraduate through training, and now you're in your attending role. And you just want to enjoy yourself, right? Enjoy the fruits of your labor, and tomorrow is not promised. So again, it's going to offer you that clarity and confidence, but also balance in your life, knowing that you're preparing for today, but you're also preparing for the future. We're not just burying our head in the sand with this debt. We're being very strategic and purposeful with our approach. And so I can't continue to harp enough that it's the flexibility and the optionality across your balance sheet. If for whatever reason the group within your hospital system is downsized and you get laid off, okay, maybe not as frequent, but it's happened. Or maybe you work for a clinic and you get laid off or you get let go. Well, if you have more liquidity on your balance sheet, you have more time that you've bought yourself to go out and do research and find the next opportunity that truly aligns with your values and your belief system and has a culture that excites you about going to work, right? Versus just having to take the next additional job or position to make ends meet. So I would say that that's going to be one of the benefits of taking this approach. The other thing is understanding that with every patient that comes into the emergency room, there's a triage process, or medical professionals recognize that, hey, there are some injuries that are more life-threatening than others. So when we're going through that cash flow analysis, even though eliminating debt and living a debt-free life is step 4 in this triage process, we're at least assessing it in step 1 with the cash flow analysis, because there are payments that have to be made to servicing the debt that we have, and that's an eroding factor on our cash flow. So it has to at least be accounted for. Now, if we identify through that analysis that, hey, you have a life-threatening debt on your balance sheet in the form of consumer debt, right? Revolving balances with 25, 28, 29% interest rates. Well, we might have to say, hey, we're going to have to commit to maybe saving 10 to 15% of your annual gross income, at least initially, and start to figure out how we can either leverage your balance sheet to consolidate this terrible debt, this inefficient debt by other means, or just accelerating the payoff towards it.
Sure.
Right? You might have to tighten the belt and maybe not go on as many lavishing trips. Maybe hold off on upgrading that car in order to eliminate that first, so that we can sustain life and become healthier from a balance sheet perspective.
Sure. It's addressing the bleeding out first compared to the broken bone first, right? One's more life-threatening than the other. And it's all about, hey, how is the financial professional, are we triaging what's, one, most important for the client, but then two, what's the biggest priority from a financial health standpoint for the client? And then the other thing that I love that you mentioned when you use the word balance, what I hear there is with appropriate balance, it helps better mitigate some of that burnout feeling, right? If I would suspect that after going through 3, 6, 10 years of training and grinding, to have to do another 3 or 5 years of grinding just to pay down all of your student debt is going to really contribute more and more to that burnout feeling. Like, hey, I'm just working to now dig out of this hole that I've built for myself. But putting the appropriate balance in place can say, oh no, I'm working to enjoy the lifestyle that the training and all of the hard work that I've been awarded, having all of these specialties, and I'm also I'm slowly coming out of the hole that I built myself debt-wise.
Right. And the biggest thing with debt is that if you can't see the finish line, it's really hard to stay motivated. So by tying all this in together from a cash flow analysis standpoint, committing to saving and making it disciplined and automated and out of sight and out of mind, to safeguarding your balance sheet and putting a strong defense in place and really filling up that moat around your financial fortress, to building liquidity, building up the reserves, filling up the war chest for opportunities, for banquets, for whatever it might be, right? Whatever analogy you want to use, just having those resources to then saying, hey, let's start living a debt-free life. Like, that isn't out of reach. Like, let's figure out how we prioritize these debts and eliminate them. There is so much anxiety that can be removed, right? You can almost see the burden lifted off the client's shoulders to where the debt's the last thing they ever think about because they're like, hey, I got a plan. It's happening. Rome wasn't built overnight. The debt in many instances isn't going to be eliminated overnight. But knowing that there is a rhyme to the reason to every dollar that's being dedicated to it, I think is what provides that clarity and that confidence for clients to enjoy the financial planning process because it needs to be humanized. We harp on that all the time. We are not going to live our lives based off of a spreadsheet all the time. Sometimes, but not all the time. And so it's just understanding that, hey, at least specifically with IRS rules and also student loan planning today, like the financial plan needs to be nimble. It needs to be proactively reviewed because changes do come down the pipe and you have to adjust accordingly, right? It just can't be set it and forget it, and it shouldn't be static in my opinion. And I think you believe the same things when it comes to just the process of financial planning.
So, Michael, timely that you actually mention recircling our action plan on a regular basis, or timely that you mention, hey, we're always repolishing a plan, because what you and I know at least is that a recent big, beautiful bill has been passed, which has more significantly changed what the student loan landscape has looked like, at least over the past couple of years. So before we begin to wrap things up, can you give all of our listeners a little bit of insights on what's changing or some things to look out for?
Yeah, I will say the big, beautiful bill, it was huge. And, there were a lot of good things that came out of it from what I would consider, and this is my opinion, a regulatory perspective on how institutions are, managing the cost of tuition, as well as what the federal government from an education department is going to be offering by way of loans for graduate programs. I'll give a little bit of insights because what I don't want to do is completely spoil an upcoming episode that we're going to have dedicated to how the big, beautiful bill will impact student loan borrowers specifically. So we're going to make a series out of that. So if you haven't already subscribed, stay tuned in and continue to come back so that you can be the first one to hear that when that information drops. But on the surface level, I'd say some of the big takeaways is that there are going to be changes to income-driven repayment plans. Some of them are going to be sunset immediately. Some of them are going to be sunset over the course of the next couple of years. And then they're trying to streamline which plans are available for borrowers. One thing that was halted by the Byrd ruling was that residency months and fellowship months for medical and dental professionals will continue to count towards public service loan forgiveness. So that was a huge win. I know that there were a lot of borrowers that were concerned with that. And then from a borrowing perspective, there are limits on what a graduate degree or a graduate student can actually go out and borrow from a federal perspective. My opinion on that is that it could hurt professions and it could cause parents and students to become more creative with how they fill the gap from the shortfall from what they get from a financial aid perspective from the education department compared to, what they have to go and get on their own, either through their own savings efforts or a private lender, which again, private loans, in my opinion, are less advantageous than federal. So don't want to give too many of the insights because we're going to have an entire episode dedicated to this, but those are some of the, at least, key highlights on a surface level.
Stay tuned, right?
Yeah, stay tuned, stay plugged in, and please subscribe.
Alrighty, so if you were to summarize what a newly attending physician should take from our episode today, what are some of the highlights to really hit home on?
Yeah, biggest highlights is sit down, go through the exercise of writing out your goals, right? They need to be SMART goals, they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be attainable, they need to be realistic, and they need to be defined or tied to some sort of time horizon, right? And start to progress through those 4 steps of cash flow analysis with the focus on becoming an extraordinary wealth builder and hitting that 15 to 20% savings rate. Second, de-risk your situation. Understand what risks you have. If you need help with assessing your risks, speak to a professional, someone that can assist you from a financial advising perspective, right? Interview a couple of them just to make sure that the services and the philosophies that they offer and present align with you as an individual and a consumer, because you want to at least appreciate what you're paying for by way of services. Third, don't be afraid to build liquidity, right? There's this myth out there that I love to bust that if you're not maxing out your Roth and maxing out your 401k, that you're not going to be prepared for retirement. It couldn't be further than the truth. At the end of the day, it just comes down to saving and having access to assets and liquidity that you can spend when you stop working. It doesn't matter if it's in a savings account versus a 401k on the surface level. So make sure that you're committing to paying yourself and putting money on your balance sheet in a diversified way.
versus the balance sheets of others, or locking yourself out of it just because you want to keep up with your colleagues on maxing out your retirement plans for the sake of maxing them out with no real purpose or intentionality. And then lastly, don't treat every debt the same. Don't amortize them all the same. Don't try to overpay them all with the same approach. Recognize that they each have their own unique abilities and they each have their own level of value that we can squeeze out of them to maximize your overall financial plan. And with that, if you follow those steps, I have very high confidence that you'll be able to find some clarity and, financial independence along the way, because you're going to give yourself optionality and flexibility with the decision-making process. And of course, you don't have to be a special at this on your own. There are people out there who do this for a living. We tell people all the time when we interview them as much as they interview us, we do this day in and day out, just like you conduct surgery or meet with patients day in and day out, right? You could almost sit down with someone and in the first 15 minutes, I'd be able to tell them, hey, these are the first things that we should be working on, right out of the gate.
And Michael, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that was my big takeaway, is understanding that from a financial perspective, you are the patient, right? So treat yourself like the patient. Now, they say doctors oftentimes are the worst patients, so it's something worth considering, right? But it's understanding that, hey, someone can help you address a lot of these challenges, especially knowing that, hey, there are a lot of complexities and unique things to consider in your world. So that's a wrap on today's episode of You're Making Money, Now What? And if you're still listening, it means you care about your financial future, which already puts you ahead of the curve.
Seriously, getting organized and intentional now can make your next 5, 10, even 30 years so much smoother and more enjoyable. Whether it's a public service loan forgiveness strategy, debt-free living with how you triage your mortgage, car loans, personal loans, and credit card debt, or just having the freedom to make career moves, you've got options. And you only got options if you have flexibility with your balance sheet.
And if you got value from today's episode, do us a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this with a fellow doctor who needs to hear it.
You can always find us at www.genesiswealthplanning.com or drop your question at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/AMA. We'd love to hear what you want us to cover next. And who knows, maybe you'll be featured in one of our future episodes.
And until next time, live well today.
And plan wisely for tomorrow. Catch you soon.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities, products, and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representatives of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hammerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077.
7237198.31 expiration 428.